Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about how to practice correctly. If you have not seen my first video on this topic, then I highly recommend that you go watch that video first. I will have it linked below. In that video, I give you my top 8 tips so that you can improve your practice and reach the goals that you want to reach. But there are still so many other ways that we can improve our practice, so I am going to give you 7 more tips in today's video. I hope that you all go watch my other video first, but just in case you don't, let me just do a quick little recap that there is actually a right way to practice and a wrong way to practice. A lot of people don't realize that you can actually practice the wrong way, reinforcing bad habits and really not making much progress. You can achieve so much more in such little time when you are straight to the point. You know how to practice, you're gonna make progress, you're gonna see results. So practicing is super important and is something that as musicians we need to know how to do. So before we get into this video, don't forget to hit that like button down below. Tip number 1. You guys are gonna hate me for this one, but it is for your good, okay? Practice with a metronome. I have said this in quite a few of my videos at this point, and I know a lot of people hate practicing with the metronome. I group myself in that category. Practicing with a metronome is not my favorite thing to do. But I think we all know that practicing with a metronome is very beneficial, so let me just remind you why. First off, it's really gonna help you establish a steady internal rhythm. It's gonna make your notes steady and solid. It's gonna help you if you in the future want to play with other musicians, if you want to play in bands, if you want to ever record yourself or record music, you're gonna need to be able to play steady and stay with a click. If you listen to any of the pro musicians, I'm sure that they have practiced with the metronome and they know how to stay on beat, stay in time. It's not something that's just gonna happen magically one day. You have to practice with the metronome. You have to sit down and train your fingers and your body to stay in rhythm. So this is my first tip, super important. Don't skip over this one. And I'm not saying that every single thing you practice, you have to practice with the metronome, but I do find that a lot of us skip over this and we don't end up practicing with the metronome nearly as much as we should. So go ahead, grab that metronome when you're in the practice room, turn it on, you will thank me later. Tip number 2 is to write reminders in your music. Okay, this is a violin concerto that I was working on. You can see there are literally so many markings, circles, reminders, commands for me to do things in this music. And I am a big believer in printing off music so that you can write in it. So often as we're learning music, as we're practicing songs, we have so much that we're having to think about. Notes, rhythm, key signatures, tone, dynamics, like there's so many things, and it can be really hard to remember all of those things, and it's super helpful if you just grab a pencil, write a reminder at the top of your music. If there's a specific measure that you struggle with, circle it, highlight it, put stars by it. I don't care what you do, but having that visual reminder will really help you, one, be able to pinpoint, oh yeah, last time I practiced this, I really struggled with that note. I really struggled with that measure. Let me go ahead and start with that, practice that part more than the rest so that I can really get that under my fingers and nail that, because let's be honest, a lot of the time we forget the things that we really need to work on. So take time to write in notes. I write at the top of my music, and a lot of the music of my students, relax in big capital letters at the top of their music, because that is something that I struggle with, that a lot of my students struggle with, probably all musicians maybe have struggled with at some point. So just having that reminder there, when they look at their music, automatically they're gonna think to relax because it's right there at the top. They can't really skip over it. So if you don't already, write reminders in your music. And if you don't have a way to print off your music, you can also do this online. Tip number 3 is to memorize your music as early as you can. I know memorizing music is something that some people are really good at. It's not really an issue for them, and for some people it is really challenging. This is why I say to, from the get-go, really think about starting to internalize that music and memorize that music. Memorizing your music is so beneficial. It helps you really be able to think about what kind of story you're telling with your song, what kind of dynamics you want to use. It lets your ears think about the tone. It lets your mind think about the song rather than just staring at the notes. You can practice your performance aspect of playing it and not just be, behind a music stand the whole time. So I think that memorizing your music is very beneficial, but a lot of us don't really start memorizing until a little bit later in the game, as far as learning a song and then perfecting it and and performing it. But the earlier you start memorizing, the way easier it's gonna be, and the more you're gonna internalize that music from the beginning, and you're not gonna be tied to your sheet music. I know that is something that a lot of us struggle with, right? We have our sheet music kind of as a crutch, and we hold on to it for dear life, and we feel lost without it. We want to break that, and one of the ways you can do that is just start memorizing your song super early. Don't wait until you've been playing your song for 2, 3, 4 weeks before you even start memorizing it. Moving on to tip number 4, divide your practice into smaller increments. Some of us have to do this by default anyway because we don't have an hour to sit down and practice maybe like we would like to. But I've actually found that dividing your practice up into smaller sections can be really beneficial. I think one, it helps you stay a little bit more focused in your practice time. It helps your fingers rest in between your practice, because I know for me, sometimes, especially with the mandolin, if I'm working on something very challenging, it's just difficult for me to have the finger strength to practice that for long periods of time. So what I'll do is I'll practice it for 20 minutes here, maybe at the beginning of the day in the morning when I have that time, and then I'll review it, practice it for 20 more minutes at the end of the day. That gives my fingers time to kind of recuperate and rest in between my practice, and also gives your brain a chance to process the information and the correction that you worked on in the morning, and then apply that to your practice later. Small increments of practice time. I know sometimes 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes feels like such a small amount of time, but don't underestimate the little nuggets that you can get of practice, because for a lot of us, we have work, we have jobs, we have things that we have to go to, and we might only have little nuggets of time, but you can really make progress if you have 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here. So use that time to be intentional with what you want to practice. You could really get a complicated riff or something that you're a measure that you're struggling with. You can get that under your fingers and really practice that thoroughly in a time slot of 10 minutes. And you know what? 10 minutes of practice is better than no practice. This next tip goes hand in hand with tip number 4, but I'm just going to give it its own category nonetheless. And it is set a timer for each thing that you need to practice. I heard this, I don't even know where, but I heard it from someone, and it is so helpful because sometimes you're sitting down, you have, maybe 3 pages, 4 pages, maybe if it's just 1 page, but sometimes sitting down with that piece of music or with a whole song that you're trying to perfect can feel very overwhelming, especially if you think I have to practice for 45 minutes or I have 30 minutes to practice and I don't even know what I need to practice. Setting a timer can be a great way to just kind of zero in on what you need to do and keep your mind from wandering and from getting distracted. For instance, a lot of the time in our songs, there's gonna be a measure or 2 that are a bit harder than the rest, or for whatever reason we struggle with. So set a timer for maybe 5 minutes. And you say, for 5 minutes, I'm going to work on this measure. I'm going to nail this measure. get it under my fingers. Okay, when that timer is up, maybe you set another timer, and this time, instead of working on that measure, maybe you pick another measure, or maybe you say, okay, once you've spot practiced, you're going to play the whole thing and work on that. Or maybe you set a timer and you say, for this amount of time, I'm going to work on dynamics. For this amount of time, I'm going to work on my performance of this. I'm going to work on relaxation. There are so many little things that you can work on, and setting a timer is very helpful, or even just setting a timer for your practice. If you do have smaller increments of time, set that timer for 10 minutes and you'll see it ticking down. Depending on what kind of person you are, that could be a bad thing, but it also could be a very helpful thing if you are someone that tends to get distracted easily, because it will make you realize how little time you have and that you really want to make the most of that time. We have 2 more tips left, but I want to say, if you have enjoyed this video so far, then feel free to leave me a comment or hit that like button down below, because it really does help me out. And you guys are so sweet and you leave such encouraging feedback, which I'm so grateful for. I'm so glad that some of you at least find these videos helpful. So let's continue to tip number 6, which is to practice in different environments. This is something that I was taught when you are preparing for a performance. You're preparing to play whatever piece you're working on. You're going to perform it, and the thing is, you're going to perform it outside of your practice room. You're obviously not going to perform it where you practice, and being in a new environment for whatever reason is always more stressful. You're not used to it, you're not as comfortable, there's more nerves that kick in. One of the ways that we can kind of help that is by practicing in different environments and practicing in different positions as well. If you always practice in the same place, in the same position, if I always practice right here sitting down, then what's going to happen when I have to play somewhere where I have to stand up and maybe I have to move around a little bit? Well, I'm not going to be comfortable doing that because I've always practiced sitting down in a specific place. So I find it super helpful to move around, go to different rooms in your house, go outside, go pretty much anywhere that you can, especially if you are preparing to play somewhere else. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a practice room, with having a place to practice. I think that is wonderful, but this is just a little side note that make sure that you aren't always practicing in the same place, in the same position. Shake it up a little bit, because that will help you get comfortable playing in all sorts of different environments with all sorts of distractions around, and make you a really well-rounded player that can play well in any sort of environment. Last but not least, tip number 7 is to stay consistent. I think this is one that we all know, but it is very true. You have to be consistent with your practice. If you practice once a week, you're not gonna see the progress that you wanna see. If you practice 2 times a week, you might see some progress, but probably not the progress that you're hoping to see within the amount of time that you're wanting to see it. So I would say that it's better to practice 15 minutes a day than to practice an hour, 1 day a week. So if you can be consistent, have that consistency in your practice. Again, if you miss a day, it's not a big deal. I take at least 1 day off every single week. Most of the time, Saturdays and Sundays, I don't have the same practicing schedule, and sometimes I even miss multiple days in the week, and that's just life. I think we all deal with that sometimes, of things happen, life happens, and that's okay. But if you can have that habit of practicing regularly, that will greatly help you out in your practice time. All right, I think that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always. And hey, if you have any extra practicing tips, feel free to comment those in the comment section down below, and I will see you guys in my next video.